Well, good morning, and it's Bible study time, and um, I've been lollygagging around, and Ellen out at St. Joe Christian, the first grade, always hatches eggs, or they try to hatch eggs for children to see, and so she took some folks out there from her Sunday school class to at least look at the incubator, check the eggs. Actually, the 21 days will be tomorrow, so they usually don't hatch anywhere 20 to 22 days, depending, or 23 days. So she may not have any today yet, but at least they'll get to see them and find out about it and things. It's kind of a cool little thing, and for people to learn about life. So anyway, they went out there. So then we were kind of chatting around and talking, and didn't get to it. So here we are, and it's time for Bible study. We started last week talking about Christ's return, living with the end in mind. And again, I will state that the one doctrine that should motivate us the most is knowing that Jesus is coming again. It should be a motivation for us. And so we go to Matthew chapter 24. We're going to look at that over the next 6 weeks, as well as the first part of Matthew 25, where Jesus gives a teaching discourse concerning what things will be or what will happen. And, we didn't remember last week we talked about three assumptions that Jesus said, no one knows the hour of the day, only the Father. He can't answer that question for them, but he does deal with it, and he does answer both questions. The questions they asked was, when will these things be, and what are the signs of your coming? Two basic questions they dealt with there. And so he's going to answer one at a time in that order. And then it will be fairly obvious when he's gone from one to the next. And we'll kind of see that today as we go into this. So when we try to define the end times as, looking like this or looking like that, we need to remember the time that Jesus was talking about, the question that he was answering when he said those things. And the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem when Titus came in and destroyed everything, really was the abomination of desolation, I believe. So I just have to keep in mind that that's what's going on, and that's what's happening here in this. So we go today and we talk about know what's coming, and knowing what to do in that. I'm not going to give you a recap from last week, but you can Google that up and on your YouTube we're there and go back and watch it and get a taste of anyway where we left off and where we're going to begin. So we're going to begin right in with Matthew 24, and we'll look first at verses 15 and 16. And we see that the desecration of the temple signals the coming in. So it says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, and then in a parenthetical, Matthew, the gospel writer, said, let the reader understand, in parentheses. And then in verse 16, he says, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. What's he talking about? Well, remember, he's going to answer them in order. So when they say to him, when will these things happen? Well, when's the temple going to fall? When's all this stuff going to take place? Well, Jesus says it's coming. 40 years down the road, 70 AD, it happened. And so I believe that's what he's talking about there. The abomination of desolation talked about by the prophet Daniel. Daniel lists that in 4 places. In chapters 1 through 6, he talks about what is going on in Daniel. He talks about what's kind of going on in his life and in the lives of others who were carried off into captivity. 3 friends of his in particular, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We know them better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But then the second part of the book of Daniel, chapter 7 through 12, deals with visions concerning the future. And that's where people kind of intermingle and try to figure out, what do the end times mean? What's it going to be? What's going to happen? And so Daniel talks about the abomination of desolation 4 times. And what does that mean? Well, it means he references 4 points when the temple is going to be desolated or desecrated. And then the abomination that's going to come out of that is going to take place? Well, we know that um, under Antiochus Epiphanes in like the 2nd century BC, um, that he went in, he desecrated the temple by sacrificing pigs in there. He put up a statue of the Greek god Zeus, and just really, to a Jew to dishonor the temple or the holy place in that way would have been, an abomination of desolation. And there was nothing they could do about it, except along comes a man. If you've ever read the interbiblical writings and you read about the Maccabees, along comes one of the Maccabees named Judas Maccabeus, and they called him the Hammer. And what did he do? He went in and he cleaned up the temple and he drove them out and he straightened everything out. And so out of that, what happened? Well, the Jews then called that a holy time, and they named it Festival of Lights. You might reference it as Hanukkah, and they celebrate that yearly. It's a festival of dedication when they went back in and they rededicated the temple. So the abomination of desolation lasted, but they were able to take control again and rededicate it and give it back to God. What happened out of that then for the next 150 years or so was the Jewish sects, the Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, all those groups became even more and more religious as time went on, making more rules and enforcing them more solidly, and becoming more adamant about what they believed and what they were doing. So did it help to rededicate the temple? Well, yeah, in a way, but all that did was just drive the religious leaders deeper into themselves rather than into knowing who God was. And they thought they knew God. They acted like they knew God, but all they were doing was just living out their own legalism in that way. So, fullness of time, what happens? God sent his son into the world. Okay, so what is Jesus saying there? He's saying that there's going to be an abomination of desolation, and then he says, "Let the reader understand." And they don't always agree. Scholars don't on what that really is getting at. But let the reader understand, and that may be that it was going to come in their lifetime. That many of them were going to see this happen 30, 40 years down the road, that things were going to begin to progress, and then the Romans were going to happen. And so what does he say to them? He says, in those days in Judea, they must flee to the mountains. If you go to the south and the Negev down there, and where there's mountains and all kinds of desolation, you go to the east, and some would even say that he was maybe even telling them, get on the other side of the Jordan, even where the mountains are. Go over there and hide. Go over there and find a place where you can dwell, where they won't come and get you. Well, what happened? When Titus came, that's where they fled. That's where they went. So was Jesus simply prophesying that's what you're going to do, or giving them instructions? Both, I think. He was doing both. So then we move to Matthew 24. Again, verses 17 through 20. And in that first section, verses 15 and 16, Jesus said that the desecration of the temple truly dictates the coming of the end. And so in 60 AD, there is when the Jews begin to revolt, and that's when things begin to get cumbersome for them. And then that was kind of the beginning of the end. And then what happened? Well, in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed, the city was destroyed. So then in verses 17 through 20, we see that distress that follows that will come suddenly. It's going to come quickly. You're not going to have time to think about it. It's just going to happen. Okay. And so here's what he says. A man on the housetop must not come down to get things out of his house. A man in the field must not go back to get his coat. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in winter or on a Sabbath. So what's he saying here? Well, he gives 4 illustrations. The first one is a man who's on his housetop. Is in the summertime, he's on his housetop, maybe in the cool of the evening. He's trying to get a little fresh air, fresh breeze blowing. And they would go up on the rooftops, and that was kind of their place to settle down until the building cooled down so they could go down and sleep inside. overnight. And what if he's up there? Man, he's got to get down quick and he's got to go on his way. And he can't even go in and find his valuables and take them with him because it'd be better. What do they say when you're in a fire? You don't go back, while you can breathe, because in a second things can change. And, either a blast may come in or the air quality may change or something that keeps you from getting out. The exit may be blocked or we don't know what. So you just need to get out while you can and let it go. Life is better than things, for sure. So that's what he's saying to do. And then the second illustration he gives is a man working in the field. And when all this comes and you see it happening, don't go home. Don't go back and get your coat. Don't go back and pack a bag. Get out of there. Get going, because you've got to make time. They're going to come after you. And if you can stay ahead of them, you can get someplace and hide. But if you can't, then you're in trouble. And they're going to come. They're going to get you. And just what ancient people did was pretty devastating. A couple of things was they would chase down, when people were fleeing, and the enemy army was coming in and you were trying to get away from them. If they caught pregnant women, they cut the babies out of them and killed them. They didn't want anybody surviving. They were pretty adamant about that kind of thing. And so the next two examples he gives about pregnant women and nursing mothers, we can imagine why they'd be afraid. Somebody's going to chase you down, and who's going to be the most vulnerable in that? Well, first trimester women are probably nauseous and sick. They're not going to travel very well. And then on down the line, you've got a body, another person growing inside of you. You're not going to run. You're not going to, be able to flee fast. They're going to catch up to you pretty quick. And so those are the kind of things that are going on there. And then the third one, nursing mothers. Well, babies aren't quiet when they're hungry. They're pretty noisy sometimes, and they need to be fed. That's all they know is they need to eat. And so that can be pretty devastating too. So you got to keep moving. You got to keep going. You got to move. And so woe to pregnant women, woe to nursing mothers, because you're going to be vulnerable to the enemy coming after you. Well, then he says, or even on a Sabbath, you don't want this happening on a Sabbath, because what's going to happen then? You can't get any supplies. And so you're going to be going in the wilderness to hide with nothing. Or what if it's in the winter? It's going to be so cold, and the winds there can just be devastating. We had a couple of days this week where it wasn't very warm, or didn't seem very warm, and the wind blew, and there was misty in the air, and it just felt like everything penetrated through you. Well, that's what the winters are like in Israel, and it can be really cold, like desert cold, and so when the desert gets cold, it can be really cold that way. And so anyway, warm in the morning, cold at night. So he just says, woe unto you if those are the kind of things that happen. And then the last section, we see that the time of distress will be so severe, God will mercifully cut it short. And the last two verses that we look at today, verses 21 and 22, say, for at that time there will be great distress, the kind that has taken place from the beginning of the world until now and never will again. Until those days were cut short, no one would be saved, but those days will be cut short because of the elect. And so there are those scholars who would say that when it says in verse 21, for at that time there will be great distress, it's kind of a turning point. Jesus has been answering the first question to that point, and now he shifts and he begins to answer the second question. And how do we know that? Well, because he says the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now and never will again. When Jesus comes again, it's never happened before like that, and it will never happen again. And I believe his coming is going to be so abrupt, so known that we can't flee. And the turmoil and the tribulation and things that are coming with it, we will simply have to work through it. But he says, if God didn't have grace, you'd never survive. No one would be saved. But he says in those days, it'll be cut short because of the elect. In other words, God's going to give favor to everyone simply because there are those who endure till the end. there are those who stood with him and were willing to die for their faith. So, well, that's where we are. That's where we get to, and that's the end. So, final judgment will be nothing like the world has ever seen. The merciful, things will be cut short because of God's mercy, and we should pray. Jesus said to them, pray for this. And so, what should we be doing? I think more than studying charts and doing that kind of thing, we need to be praying that when Jesus comes again, we will be ready and that we will be found faithful. Well, got to go. Bye.